Hey everyone, and welcome to a standard deck tech video of my blue-white control deck. Now, my build of blue-white control is based off of Brian Kibler and Sam Black's innovations from Grand Prix Kuala Lumpur just a week or two ago. And the main differences between this and the build that Patrick Chapin popularized at Pro Tour San Diego is the distinct lack of counterspells in the main deck of my version. No negates, no essence scatters, no flash freezes, and definitely not any cancels. These counterspells were much too situational against most other decks, while cards like Baneslayer Angel, Mindspring, and Martial Coup are much better against the field as a whole, which means that they're much more effective than these counterspells would have been. So what I'm going to do to try and explain my choices, my card choices, and my strategy choices for this deck, I'm going to go through card by card, explain those choices through the sideboard as well, talk about how these changes make specific matchups better, and why I think these changes have improved the matchups for blue-white control against the field as a whole. Looking first at the mana base, we've got our 8 blue-white dual lands. Celestial Colonnade is fantastic. Man lands are always good in every sort of deck. They're a win condition, they're a blocker, they're everything you could ever need. They even fix your mana. They're perfect, and I wouldn't switch them for anything. Glacial Fortress is also a great card, helps improve the consistency of your mana. Neither of these are very debatable as card choices. Now, an interesting thing you'll notice when looking at this deck list is that this deck has 12 basic lands, 6 islands and 6 plains, but no fetches to go along with them. Now, the reason we need to run so many basic lands is because we're running 4 Field Mist Border Posts, acting as blue-white dual lands 8 through 12. And because of the Field Mist Border Posts, we do need to have these basic lands. If we don't, it's usually just acts as a bad Everflowing Chalice, which is not really something we want to be doing on our turn 3, tapping out for an extra land. Now, there are some hands that you can't keep, like Glacial Fortress and 2 Field Mist Border Posts, but those are drastically outweighed by the advantages of Field Mist Border Post, which I will get to later. Because of the necessity for basic lands, we can only run one Tectonic Edge. Now, normally this would be a large problem, because Tectonic Edge is really used to be the deck's only way to deal with manlands, like Raging Ravine, opposing Celestial Colonnades, or Stirring Wildwood. However, because we've cut Tectonic Edge to only one copy, we have added other cards that, while they can deal with manlands, also have applications outside of this. I'll talk about those later as well. And finally, we have Everflowing Chalice, which is absolutely fantastic. It acts as an extra land or two if you need it, helps power up your X spells. It's a definitely strong card and needs to be played in any sort of blue-white control deck that has room for it. So, first we're going to go by converted mana cost, lowest to highest, and we'll start with Path to Exile. Now, Patrick Chapin's original build had 2 instant speed spot removal spells. He ran 1 Celestial Purge and 1 Path to Exile, but that's effectively 2 Path to Exile. And so we added 2 more Path to Exiles in order to deal with manlands. Now, Path to Exile is really the only spot removal spell in the entire deck that can deal with manlands because of its instant speed. However, Path to Exile also has applications outside of just dealing with manlands, unlike Tectonic Edge. It can get rid of a Knight of the Reliquary before it becomes active. It obviously can take out some very threatening creatures on your opponent's side of the board. It can deal with Ball Lightnings, Siege Gang Commanders, while also taking out manlands all the same. And we'll go over in a second how Path to Exile also has synergy with some of the other cards in the deck. But it's definitely a very strong removal spell, one of the best in the format, and it really helps a lot, both with dealing with manlands and other troublesome creatures on the other side of the board. Now, the synergy in this deck comes from Knight of the White Orchid, which interacts with Field Mist Border Post and Path to Exile extremely well. Because of Knight of the White Orchid, you don't need to worry about pathing your opponent's turn to Putrid Leech. If you do, you can then just play a Knight of the White Orchid and go get a land of your own, bringing the land totals back up to even on both sides, while your opponent does not have a Putrid Leech and you just gained a turn off him. I can also say that there's no better feeling in the world than playing turn 1 plains into Field Mist Border Post, replaying the plains on turn 2, and then playing a Knight of the White Orchid on that same turn. Being able to do this just gives you so much tempo advantage over your opponent that is usually difficult for them to get back into the game after that. It helps you ramp up to your X spells, just like Everflowing Chalice, helps you get to a Baneslayer, Jace, or Day of Judgment even more consistently, and its 2/2 first strike body is even respectable against some decks. It's very important in game 1 to have against red deck wins, as it allows you to keep back Goblin Guys and Ball Lightnings until they choose to spend a burn spell on it. And it can also keep back Bloodbraid Elves and force them to pump their Putrid Leeches while chumping them if need be. Knight of the White Orchid is definitely one of the strongest cards in the deck, and it's a huge upgrade over playing some situational counterspells. The final card we have to deal with manlands is Spreading Seas. Now, having 4 of them means you can try and lock out your opponent's mana with it if you're playing against a deck that is susceptible to that. At FNM last night, I know I won a match against Jund by getting lucky and drawing all 4 Spreading Seas to lock him out of red and green mana. And while, of course, that can't always happen, it's usually enough to slow them down. If they play a turn 1 Savage Lands and you can put a Spreading Seas on it before their turn 2, you know they won't be able to drop that turn 2 Putrid Leech, which is pretty much Jund's major threat against blue-white control. And at worst, it always cycles. If you're playing in a matchup that doesn't really care about having islands, like another sort of control deck, worst case scenario, or best case scenario, it'll take out their manlands. Worst case scenario, it's 1 in a blue to cycle a card, which is not the worst. We already talked about Field Mist Border Post, so I'll just move on to Oblivion Ring, which is another spot removal spell, a little less efficient than Path for most of the matchups that we care about. While it doesn't let your opponent go get a basic land, obviously, it also can't take out any important haste creatures, such as Ball Lightning in the red deck wins matchup. While it can deal with troublesome non-creature permanents, those are few and far between in the current format, and since some decks play Oblivion Ring, such as Naya and Jund plays Pulse, Oblivion Ring is never a guaranteed removal spell. However, it's still very strong against certain matchups. In the Control Mirror match, it can take out Jaces. It's good at taking out Pithing Needles post-board if someone brings that in to neuter your Jace. And also, if anyone brings in Mana Barbs or against any sort of Howling Mine deck, Oblivion Ring is just an all-around very good removal card, and